This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not provide medical advice. It exists simply to entertain and to inform. Well, everyone, we've been doing the PH Pod for over 3 years at this point, and we have covered many topics. We've had many wonderful guests, and we've had a lot of laughs as well. And while we felt it was time to close out the show and move on to our other pursuits, we couldn't go out without doing one more show. If you're a new listener to this podcast, hey, welcome. This might be an awkward place to start, as folks who have been following us know we've announced that this will be our final episode of our humble little production. And we're going to do one last topic that I promise, but we've got to take a moment before we get to it to thank a few folks. Actually, a lot of folks. So all of you out there who have been following the show for years and stayed in touch all this time, writing us messages, etc., we want to thank you. If you've left us one of those 5-star reviews we were always asking for, we really appreciate that as well. So thank you. If you sent us a kind message or a bit of positive feedback about the show, really thank you. It means the world to us. And anything that was ever said that was nice about myself, my co-hosts, something that made you laugh or something that you enjoyed, or if you told us that a show we did or a topic we covered, or just the show in general was particularly meaningful to you, that always got passed along to me, and so we thank you for that as well. Oh, and even there's a few, not many, but a few mean things that have been said out there, out on the internet. It's kind of how these things work. I don't know if that was one of those things. I just want you to know that got passed along too, but only so we could laugh about it, which we did. Look, we've still got one more show to do, so we're going to get to it. It's time to enjoy ourselves and close out the Poor Historians podcast in style with a topic I've often teased, and it's near and dear to my heart. So I thought I'd share it with all of you, and we hope you enjoy it.
Poor historians, poor historians, poor historians.
Welcome, everyone. This is Poor Historians, a podcast misadventuring into the archives of medical history and beyond. I'm Dr. Max, and I'm joined here by my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Aaron. Sound excited. Dr. Mike.
Wow-wee-woo.
As well as the best medical history intern a show could ever ask for, Alba.
Alba.
Oh, best one yet. Best one.
Thanks.
Excellent. You've been saving that for
It
the
just
occasion.
came to me.
Did you take that from a Moby song? I like that.
I probably took it from something in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Moby's still around?
Moby? I don't know.
We should get Aaron to shave his goatee and put on some glasses, and he
He
can
does
be
look
Moby.
like Moby.
Yeah.
Nice.
Dance, woman.
I
What a great
sing.
song.
Well, are you guys all ready to bring this show to a better close than Game of Thrones?
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do.
I think that's true.
Do-do-do-do. In
You're
my
doing Final
dreams,
Countdown.
I'm podcasting all the time.
See? He got it. Woohoo! Call out.
Does that mean
Anyway.
you are ready to bring the show to a better close than Game of Thrones?
Mm-hmm. Not hard to do, though.
I am. I didn't see Game of Thrones, so low bar for me.
I'll tell you, we can only go up from there. Well, this being the final show, we're going to put a little extra oomph into it. So if you're accustomed to turning off the podcast once you hear those closing credits, stick around a little bit. We'll put a little something special in after the outro for everyone. And it will probably not be Aaron beatboxing Moby.
Mhm.
Dang.
But I'm not guaranteeing it's not going to be that. We've got a big episode for all the reasons we just said. So we're going to dive right in, break all the formats, no skits, no other things. We're just going to go straight to our main segment. The good thing about this being a finale is that I had a good topic in mind for quite a while, really from the start of this show. In that's because the topic I'm covering is one that started all of this for me, as far as the love of medical history goes. And I don't think you guys know what it is.
It's dysdiadochokinesia.
That's my favorite word. But not the reason. Not the reason. I have hinted at this many times in the show, and I figured it was just finally time to do it. So, a little background. When I was accepted to medical school, I came across a book called The Knife Man by Wendy Moore. And I read it before medical school started. It was about this super eccentric Victorian era, or actually I think pre-Victorian era Scottish surgeon who led this really incredible life inside and outside of medicine. And I had a history background in college. So reading history was already something I enjoyed doing, but this was a book about medicine, the field and practice I was going to go into, and it was totally captivating. The surgeon was intellectually rebellious, he was uncouth, he was exceedingly eccentric, and I can trace back my initial interest in doing this show or any show on medical history to this single book. And I'm happy to say it's the sole source for my episode today, about the man who would become to be known as the father of scientific surgery. And I'm sure he was equally proud to be the inspiration for this episode. Both excellent achievements. The other cool thing about this guy, and I don't think I've said his name, have I? This is
Nope.
the
It's
episode
William Wallace.
about William.
Oh, that's right.
No, this is the episode about John Hunter.
Mm,
And the cool thing about this topic,
Boring
other
name.
than what I just said,
Yeah.
is that
I've never heard
There's-
of this guy.
a ton of connections to our show that you guys are going to appreciate, especially our fans too. I have probably mentioned his name here and there. Whenever it comes up, I always have said, we will do a show about him. And it's maybe it happens once every 15 shows or something like that. So I was happy to at least do this as the final topic. And I had a lot of fun rereading this book because I forgot how many cool places we've butted up against this guy. It has been very understated. So I'm going to try to point them out.
You said
as
butt
we
it
go
up.
we're twerking on John Hunter
That's got to be
Do
the
it, do
title
it,
of this
do it,
episode.
kid.
or the William
Twerking.
Wallace of medicine.
He did paint his face blue before he went into operations. Weird
He
thing.
did.
No, he didn't. With John Hunter, we're going to start at the beginning when he, future pillar of medical history, was born. That was in 1728 to a Scottish farming family. He ran around the fields. He did farm work as a child, and later, having apparently demonstrated no particular talents, not my words, came from the book, he went into carpentry. So, sorry,
At age 4, probably.
probably
Yeah.
age 4. Yep. Hacked off a few of his digits, sewed them back on, and that's how his story begins.
He did not, did he?
No, he didn't.
No. Whew. Okay.
No, but he did apparently not like carpentry very much. The young John Hunter was more interested in the natural world and way less interested in making cabinets out of wood. To be fair, as a woodworking enthusiast, I also do not get a kick out of cabinetry. Doesn't do a thing for me. So me and John Hunter have that much in common.
It's really specific, right? Making cabinets.
Yes, it's very specific. It's
like
very
really easy to mess up.
exacting. It's super important. You got to have cabinets, but they're boring.
Oh,
I'm sorry if
yeah.
you're a cabinet maker, but it's the last show. So if we're going to make anybody angry, come at us. So as he is running around as a youth, one of the things was he's just in the fields. He's observing domestic and animals, wildlife, generally just thinking about stuff, which it might be said could be something of his brand later on. At the age of 21, John's family wanted him to leave the idyllic fresh air of the countryside to gain the type of seasoning the big city had to offer.
Cumin?
I.e., yeah, they didn't have enough room in the house. He's just a
Cumin.
freeloader.
I think he was one of 10 children and only like 3 of them survived to adulthood. So I think there was probably space. I got to be honest.
Yeah, maybe not in the family plot, but in the house there was.
Here we go. There we go. Well, I think that seasoning was likely a spicy mix of 18th century London coal soot and the competing aroma of piles and piles of dead bodies, which
Oh,
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
not my favorite season.
nope,
No,
it's not the
it's-
allspice you're looking for. This all had to do with his brother William's favorite hobby, which was dissecting people for money. 'Cause you see, William Hunter, his older brother, was a premier anatomist in London at the time. And John, his little brother, was sent to live with him and learn the ropes or maybe the sinews of the anatomy trade.
That was a good one.
Yeah, it's because they're ropey. Let's say John started out with the acquisitions department of Williams Anatomy School. So setting the scene for this, we've talked about some of the sketchy anatomy practices of the mid to late 18th century, the time period before when we featured our episode on the paths of Burke and Hare. These were the famous resurrectionists, the term for people who stole bodies for a living and sold them to medical schools or anatomists. John Hunter predates that. So he was the original, he was doing body snatching and whatnot on vinyl, like the cool before it was
This
cool.
is so gross.
Alba wasn't here for that
That's
episode.
So gross.
Yeah,
No,
that
there's
was
an
a fun
episode
one.
on that.
Oh
There
yeah.
is.
Oh,
It's an earlier one that we did.
classic.
So John Hunter was not afraid to get his hands dirty, super literally, since there was no gloves used for dissections,
Oh
but
god.
also kind of figuratively he'd get his hands dirty. He was kind of described as this working class dude, like a brusque manner and adept with his use of profanity. And that's Scottish profanity, which is levels above.
Yeah, but you can't understand what they're saying.
That's true. It's just always
You
angry
know
when
you're
they're
getting
saying
cursed at, though. I think it's
You
pretty
definitely
clear.
know you're getting
Yeah.
cursed at.
Yeah, and if they say Begbie, you know the mother of all
Mm.
swears is coming right after that.
Oh, it's such a good movie.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, so what this meant was he was really chummy with the sort of people who felt a calling to go into graveyards in 18th century London, secure some bodies that weren't being used anymore, like people who once lived in them, and would deliver them to the back door of an anatomy school so that future surgeons could learn the bits and pieces to remove, or the ones you're supposed to leave behind in their future patients.
How would they know if they were dead? You could take everything out and they're like, oh, look, they're still dead.
I don't think they were too picky.
Mhm.
John was not above being the actual person in the graveyard, like drumming up or digging up, rather, the his own business. If he needed to be, he was out there with these people doing this. And he would also just be the one doing the deals. Hey, you've got a body. We've got a dissection room. We need to, we're low on stock. He was the go-between. And these people actually really enjoyed dealing with this guy.
But this was illegal, right? This digging up.
Sort of. I'll get to that in just
Kinda,
a second.
sorta,
It
kinda.
was
Okay.
illegal-ish. But I mean, he was just the guy who really wanted to get the freshest bodies. He was a, kind of a farm to dissection table sort of thing for the day. He also had a really intricate system of bribing undertakers to fill coffins with rocks and do a little switcheroo for the body that was in there, because you get them a little bit fresher that way. Those bodies just kind of fall off a truck or something, and then they just ended up at his brother William's anatomy school. John was really, really good at this. And Alba, to your point, while dissection for anatomy wasn't exactly illegal, the way that you procured bodies for dissection wasn't quite legal either.
You'd almost say, like at the time, it was immoral. Like a lot of the reason why people didn't want this done because they thought it desecrated their body in the afterlife. And
yes, that was definitely part of it. And there were some hard and fast legal lines. So if you were to when they took bodies out, they would leave all the jewelry and things in the grave, because grave robbing is illegal. But if you're not stealing the valuables, it technically was like this. It's grody, but it's not technically illegal.
Is a gray area that somehow allows you to steal the body but not the jewels.
Yes.
Yep.
Correct.
it's habeas
Wow.
corpus.
That's exactly what that
Habeas
was.
corpus. Sounds right.
I think I'll look it up later. It's got to be what it is. Schools of anatomy like Williams were gross, like literally gross anatomy, but also totally gross because there's no preserving of bodies. You can't put them in a fridge. It's this 18th century. And so school was really only in session during the winter months, where the ambient cold could kind of keep the rot at a manageable level while the anatomy students dove into all those bodily fluids one could imagine. And they tried to learn the structure and function of the human body as best as it was known at the time. And yes, that did involve, too, tasting. There are a few passages of tasting different fluids. And yes, all the
come
fluids.
on.
We'll leave it there.
Hopefully they drank pineapple juice before they died.
For science.
Oh, Mike. How old are you?
Perhaps it had something to do with his carpentry background and tool use, but it turned out that John Hunter was the Shohei Ohtani of anatomy, albeit something of a rookie stage in his career. He was the best. Maybe not paid that much, but he just had the most prolific career, came on the scene, did his thing. John Hunter went from attending some of Williams' lectures, to basically when he first got there, to performing his own dissections and his own preparations, where you take an organ or a piece of the body and put it in spirit or alcohol so that it will not rot any further, and you put it on display. And eventually, he was the single talent behind what would later be William Hunter's huge success as a premier anatomist and surgeon of England at the time. And by the end of his long career, John's long career, As both an anatomist and surgeon himself, it's estimated he probably performed at least 2,000 dissections on people, not counting other things.
Wow.
Other things like
Yeah, what other things?
We'll get to
surgeries, or we'll get there. We'll get there.
Animals?
Yeah, a lot of animals.
No.
Well, I mean, a lot of dead animals. Yeah, we'll get there. So, showing all this promise that he did, ultimately John starts moving towards a career as a surgeon. He just doesn't take a really traditional way for the time to get there, because here's the way it was supposed to work. You want to be a surgeon at this time, you apprentice at age 14 to 17, usually the starting time. And that could last about 7 years as a surgeon's apprentice. And that means doing dressing changes, holding down screaming patients, and trying not to vomit is most of your duties. Then maybe you find an anatomy school in Edinburgh or London and you get some training for a few years there. Then you've got to find a job working at the hospital wards, which you pay them £50 a year for the privilege of, more years of all of that. And I don't know how much money that is in today's time, but it's a lot of money back then, certainly. Then you do all that and you take the exam at Surgeons Hall, the same one that the women known as the Edinburgh Seven braved a male fragility-fueled riot to sit for in 1870, much after this story. And if you were successful there, you got your surgical diploma. But you're not done, because then you got to become a junior surgeon and get a job at a charity hospital where you take care of the poor for free. But at the same time, you're networking. You're building up your 18th century LinkedIn profile. You're making those connections and trying to find some good old nepotism routes to build a lucrative private practice. And you're doing all this charity care while you're trying to show your skills and get your wealthy paying clients as a senior surgeon. And that's when you really made it. So that's the normal way. But John does this a little bit backwards, starting in anatomy and just skipping to the nepotism step a little bit by having his older brother, William, who was a rising surgeon at this point, use his favor to get him a job as a surgeon's apprentice to William Cheselden at St. George's Hospital.
That
And
sounds fancy.
It does sound, it's a good English name, I would say.
William Cheselden? What'd you say?
Cheselden.
Cheselden. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Cheselden.
William Cheselden. Cheselden.
I'd like to picture he's probably like that Steve Buscemi meme trying to blend in with the cool kids because he's like already in his 20s when all the other apprentices are like 14 to 17.
Oh, God.
But John Hunter, he kind of gets in there. And under Cheselden, John does all the apprentice things. Then he's doing bloodletting. He's lancing boils. He's dressing sores. He's treating minor injuries. And he's forming a deep and lasting appreciation for the cornucopia of venereal diseases that were part and parcel of cultural experience of 18th century London.
Excellent.
That was just a really well-crafted sentence.
Thank
Max.
you. I like that sentence. Let's dwell on that.
It was. We should clap for that.
And that's the show, folks. So by 1752, as he progressed through his apprenticeship, he would go on to assist in surgeries. And that meant holding people down, giving them laudanum and alcohol because they haven't figured out how anesthesia or that anesthesia could exist. And he hands his instruments to his next mentor, who is the senior surgeon, Percival Pott. You might remember this guy if you've heard our episode on the scrotal cancer and chimney sweeping industry link. Most of the surgeries of the day included amputations of limbs, trephining of skulls, putting a hole in the skull, cataract surgeries, which just sounds terrifying in an age before anesthesia.
Jeez Louise,
What? That was one of the early ones.
Cataract surgery?
Yeah.
It's
Uh-huh.
no anesthesia.
Hold
still.
That
No, I
seems
said,
really
don't look over there.
precise
Don't look over there. Don't look.
time.
It doesn't have to be precise.
You think they use
Your
cocaine?
outcomes are
Maybe
poor.
that might have been something they may have been able to anesthetize.
For local, yeah.
They didn't mention that here. I'm going to choose to believe yes, because it's way nicer if you have some anesthetic there. Then they would also do lithotomies, which in the pre-anesthesia age absolutely sound like a horror show. I'm going to spare you the details. If you want to look up what a lithotomy is, and it's got its own position. It's
That's
Yeah.
what I'm afraid of looking
Yeah.
it up for, because I know what the lithotomy position is.
yeah, there we go.
All
It's it was not a pleasant surgery, and I don't really think they do them except very rarely now. So John's bouncing back and forth from the wards of St. George's, and in the colder months, he's back at his brother's anatomy school. His knowledge, his independence are continuing to grow, and he demonstrates more and more completely gifted talents at dissecting minute structures. He puts them up on display for all these anatomy students. And ultimately, for a dogged attention to detail and propensity to make anatomical discoveries, he's at the forefront. He's doing things like dissecting out all the cranial nerves and like putting them on display. And he's doing these very difficult preparations. And he will be one of the ones credited with multiple discoveries. But there's a little bit of a twist to that, and the reason why you may not have heard of many of them, which will come at the end. By 1755, William, his older brother, is probably like, John, you're doing super good at this anatomy surgery thing, so why don't we send you to Oxford, get you some of that formal schooling, just really round out your educational experience. John gives that about a 2-month college try and drops out because he said, quote, they're making a woman of me. I'm curious what you guys think that means.
They're
yeah.
making you strong and intelligent and
That is
capable
exactly-
of leadership and
That's exactly what he
multitasking
meant.
and putting up with everybody's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
There
more
it
or
is.
less. And by that, he meant they were asking him to read and appreciate Latin and Greek works of literature, which was something he felt.
So making him
Was-
smarter.
Yeah, I mean, in those respects, it was. But he thought it was taking valuable time away from his like rending apart stolen dead bodies for educational value, which is more masculine in his eyes, right?
He started as a carpenter, and he's probably not wrong. He's learning pretty good. Maybe they can't teach him anything.
Well, Latin. They could
Yeah,
probably
but
teach
what? Okay. Utway,
Yeah,
Ingsbury,
don't 2 out of the
Uye,
3 of you
into
have
a
an English
Ide.
degree?
Apartment Bay.
2 out of 3 of us do have an English degree, and it does put us in touch with our feminine sides. That is science.
It does.
There was
It sure does.
there was some reasoning behind his disdain for learning all these classics, and it came from his disparagement of the understanding of medicine by all those famous Greek physicians like Galen. Previous episode note here as well, we did do the Galen and the Four Humors, and I think John Hunter would have appreciated that episode because while all of his fellow surgeons of the day revered Galen and those guys, John Hunter was like, I don't think they know anything. I don't think the Greeks know much about medicine at all. And he was right. See our other episode for some of those details, but he was right about a lot of that because John Hunter valued empiricism above anything that was written down before his time. And he, unlike his colleagues, was fully aware that while Galen wrote all these tomes on the practice of medicine, he was completely clueless about how anything worked in the human body. Basically, John Hunter knew that the Greeks didn't gain their knowledge of medicine by dissection and observation. They got it from the time-honored practice of just making stuff up with confidence and having that pass as wisdom.
I did a lot of thinking about it. Well, you just think about it.
Yeah, they did. I mean, they were like, you have these humors and blah, blah, blah. Did we
They're
actually observe these
philosophers, yeah.
humors and what they do? No, this is the way it is. And for centuries and centuries, this is how physicians believed. And John Hunter came along and said, none of that makes sense. Why are we doing this? Why are we revering these former historical physicians that did not have the understanding we could have today? And I think that was a very, very good foresight. So from John Hunter's point of view, he wanted to rethink the entire practice and understanding of medicine from the ground up. And starting from the principles of anatomy, kind of where he started to learn this stuff, he wanted to learn medicine from trial and experimentation. He was out to wreck all the foundations of what physicians and surgeons of the time were taught, and he would make so very many enemies because of this particular trait. Now, his brother William followed the teaching of the classics approach in his anatomy lectures. John, when he was at the lectern, he taught that what was in front of him by dissection and displaying the structures discovered. He would encourage his students to have spirited debates about what they thought certain functions and forms might be. And here's kind of a cool example of how he went about these things. Although he wouldn't have known all of their functions, John Hunter created a complete anatomical preparation of those cranial nerves, as I mentioned, by taking decapitated criminal heads and boiling them down in sea salt.
Mm,
Oh my.
very tasty.
The first cranial nerve that he made, preparation that he made, was the olfactory or smelling nerve. And this is basically the first specimen that he makes for his own personal collection, which will become a whole thing as we go on.
He's probably testing his own smelling nerve.
Yeah, well, he probably said this is near
Or
the nose. We
ruining
smell
it.
with the nose. It might have to do with that. Not that he would know exactly how it worked, but he just wanted to catalog all the new things that he could
And he
find.
found out by boiling to just like all the meat
I'm
come
just
off the skull.
I just kind of got that like image of somebody putting a head in a boiling. I mean, it's just not something I would be like, you know what? I think I want to spend my weekend doing this.
Well, there's a few YouTube videos I could link to.
No.
if you
I'm
wanna
good,
try to-
thank
Are
you.
there?
Okay.
Oh.
No,
I'm
I don't
good.
know that there are, but I'm not going to look.
Faces of John Hunter.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I'm good.
So, but he would do stuff like this to soften all the soft tissues and peel them away delicately. That was
And
one of the ways that he
And
would,
harden the students.
Yeah, well, I don't think.
Could you
don't
imagine?
think-
I mean, we complain about school now. Just imagine you come into lecture and there's a boiling head in the front of the hall.
Yeah, you're having a weird day if that happens now.
Yeah.
So there was another thing. So there was this belief, kind of religiously underpinned at the time, that embryos developed as tiny, perfect scale versions of the fully formed creature. True story. Whether
I
it was an
guess it
animal or
makes sense.
human.
I would have thought that probably if I
I
didn't
mean-
already know otherwise.
Mhm.
Except you've
Like, if
seen
you
like
never saw
farm
them.
animals born, and it's not like anyway. So
Oh,
people
yeah.
thought that like, all right, you have a horse when it's in the uterus. It's a tiny, perfect anatomical horse, and it just gets bigger as it goes. Which, again, we've seen babies of all the species and gone like, I don't know, they kind of change a lot, right?
Mm.
Now, Hunter, while his older brother William dismissed animal dissection, like it was not useful, these were lower life forms, whatnot, John Hunter was fascinated by everything in the natural world, and so he did a lot of experimentation and dissection of dead animals. And basically, so he does this careful, painstaking dissection of chicken embryos. He's taken eggs at various times since they were incubated and fertilized or whatever. I'm not a farmer. I don't know how that stuff works.
I still
Like we
don't know
had-
how that works.
Nah, I don't. It's magic. They pop open.
Mhm.
And he would open up the eggs and examine the embryos inside. And what he observed, he posited, probably applied to all life forms, even humans. And that was teeny tiny embryos did not look like microscopic, fully formed chickens. And through this, he could see that they actually started as this tiny little blobby thing. He didn't write blobby thing. I'm interpreting a little bit there, but this very simple lump of tissue. And then he would notice that the spinal cord would develop next in the chicken. And then he would notice that the major organs would develop next, and then the limbs of the chicken. And his theory was that probably all life starts at some sort of simple structure, and it becomes more complex as the organism ages. It was like heresy at the time, but John saw it. He saw it happening. They had rudimentary microscopes at this time. He recorded it, and he just didn't really care what the religious implications of all these findings were. Some of that attitude would actually lead to some of his stuff being suppressed until well after his death. But this is another way he challenged
Shocking.
a lot of these assumed
Mhm.
truisms in medicine. And as I mentioned before, it brought him into some contention with a lot of his peers and even some of his mentors.
I think we saw a whole series of like, I don't know how they got the pictures, but they were pictures of all the embryonic stages. And I was like, oh, look, we're a manta ray. Oh, look, we're a burrito. Aw, we're this cute little burrito. Oh, the burrito has 2 sprouts in the front. I mean, yeah, none of it looks, it's the weirdest sci-fi looking.
Yeah.
Embryonic
And in that
development.
too, and you wonder about how we figured those things out.
It's a xenomorph. Like
It's
a pale
not-
pink
yeah.
xenomorph.
Zygote, that's another one of them, right?
Yeah, now he
No?
wouldn't have known that. The zygote being the very first,
Oh,
egg
okay.
and sperm.
And
get
that would have
fertilized,
been a Latin term. So he wouldn't have called it that.
That's-
Is it Latin? I don't know.
I have no idea. But
I
that
like
was-
this dude. As of the chickens,
Mhm.
I'm on board. I like him.
Okay,
yeah,
well,
we're going to tell you, yeah. When does he get to dogs? And then we're going to be off the train.
you're probably going to like this next bit then, because now we're going to talk about where 2 learned professionals of their time are going to have a fight over testicles.
Yes.
Yay!
Yeah, I'm gonna like that. Okay. No.
So the widespread belief at the time was that an infant's testicles dropped into the scrotum at birth, precisely at the moment of the first breath or the first cry.
Just
Mhm.
Wah, plop, right? That was the prevailing medical wisdom of the time. Now, John Hunter, who had dissected many pregnant cadavers as well as the fetuses inside, had observed over a series of doing many of those dissections that the testicles go on a bit of a journey, got a bit of wanderlust, and they would arrive at their ultimate destination well before birth had occurred.
Had these people never seen a newborn child then? Like, you'd know, look, there's nuts on the outside of the body.
That is part of what he would say. He would say, like, that
Just
doesn't
go
make
to
any
the
sense.
window and look down.
That wasn't the teaching, though. That
Wait,
wasn't the teaching.
but the argument was whether they
Oh,
plopped
just
out
plopped.
as soon
Got
as the
it.
baby was born, or
Right,
if they were already there.
The
before
first
the baby
breath
was born.
causes the testicles to descend into
Well,
the
okay, but
scrotum
you also would
at
have
the
there'd be
moment.
breech
Oh.
births.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, what if
Basically.
they come out testicles first?
They
I
must
don't
be
know what
breathing.
that birth is called. It's a bad place to be, I would think. Yeah,
Aw,
so in
nuts.
actuality, the fetus developed, or the testicles in a fetus, an embryo, basically develop near the kidneys, and they sort of like, as the fetus grows, they descend down around the back of the abdominal wall, and they emerge through the lower abdominal wall, kind of in your groin region, and then they settle in the scrotum, and that has absolutely nothing to do with your first breath. They are there, I think, about a month beforehand.
Yeah, like
And
your
John
breathing
Hunter, who
just
had-
makes them go boop boop.
Right, which, look, that image is way funnier, I have to admit, and it would be
It
more
is.
fun if that's how it worked, but John Hunter was like, I've done a lot of dissections on, embryos, and no, I don't think that's how it is. John Hunter also observes that this is probably the reason that some infants are born with hernias, which are sacs of intestine that may be found to have kind of traveled along the same path that the testicle takes. And it causes a very potentially dangerous surgical problem in children, especially of that time. It's certainly something they can fix today, but at that time, this is a bad thing when your child was born with these hernias. So John Hunter and his buddy and mentor, Percival Pott, the preeminent surgeon, they have a nice fireside chat about all of his theories about how testicles form, about life, those sort of things. And later, Percival Pott in 1757 happens to publish, quote, an account of a particular kind of rupture frequently attended upon the newborn children, end quote. And he takes full
Oh.
credit for discovering the descent of the testicle and why it causes the hernias in those children.
What a jerk.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, rude.
But he's not the guy to cross because he'll just beat the crap out of you.
well, you mean John Hunter?
Hunter? Yeah.
Yeah, he did not sound like, and there's also like he had a temper and stuff, and he was just a tough farm boy who cut people apart. So I would not cross him either.
Yeah.
It's like an actually scary Sweeney Todd.
Kind of, yeah, he would-
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, definitely. I wonder what his singing voice was like.
That'd actually be a really good movie.
I think so. Let's do it.
Oh my God. They must have done John Hunter like a horror film.
I don't think so. He's got like one
No?
book about him.
What?
it?
He needs
No
a horror
film?
movie.
We'll work on it next.
Because they have Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Why can't they do John
Yeah.
Hunter?
I think I watched part of that. It was bad.
I
Wasn't
tried
bad.
it. Yeah.
John Hunter, cadaver dissector.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it needs to be a movie. You're not wrong. Well, so William, John's older brother, is like, not cool, bro, in the form of publishing a critical review on Pott's book. And he accuses him of plagiarizing his brother's work. And something William would later do in his own career. So I don't know that this fighting on his brother's behalf would qualify as altruism. But Pott writes back in a tiff. He says, you don't have any evidence, and multiple students come to the forefront and they're like, yeah, we totally, in fact, he made the preparations of this. We've seen the embryos and he's explained this in multiple lectures in our class. And we totally saw you talking to him at the fireside chat. So you're lying. And Pott is caught red-handed, more or less.
Wow.
Mm.
That is the 18th century version of getting served. Or
Wow,
maybe
yeah.
getting eaten up and leaving no crumbs. In the modern parlance, I don't know if I used that correctly, but I'm trying.
No, now
I
you
don't
just
know.
say like, no, that's misinformation. That he didn't know that. I knew that. He took it from me.
It's
He would
an
double
alternative
down.
way.
Fake news.
Yeah.
After all this, Pott did admit that he saw one preparation, quote unquote, at the Hunter's anatomy school, and that he didn't mean to cheat the brothers, and he never spoke about the subject again. Mind you, he didn't say sorry or any of those things, but he did say at least that much. So in 1760, John Hunter decides he's definitely going to do the surgery thing. He kind of dabbled as an apprentice, but it's a long road, as I mentioned. So he's like, I'm going that road. And considering his unorthodox entrance to the field, he takes a different track to kind of speed things along. And he goes into the military to do his part in the 7 Years' War, which started in 1756 And it was a global conflict that took place in Europe where everybody was mad at each other and nobody could remember why. I did read a bit about it, but it was boring and I don't remember it, nor will I recount it here. Surgeons in the military were granted the ability to serve as a surgeon in civilian life. So this was actually a pretty smart track for him to take. The secondary bonus was that John would be able to use this time to do all kinds of fun empiric research and questioning of all the accepted norms that so many of his colleagues derided him for. And the quintessential example here occurs during the assault on Belle Ile, which is an island off the coast of Brittany. The English assault the island. They do all kinds of damage. John Hunter is surgeoning on a naval ship off the coast. He's prizing free splinters, a term that they used, of wood and bone, and he's sawing off mangled limbs, and he's removing musket balls, and he's handling maggoty bandages. And so he's doing all this stuff on these like rocking hospital boats and everything. And the English finally take the island while he's on those boats. And after many days, they bring him a group of 5 French soldiers that were found hiding out after they had all been shot 5 days previously on that first day of the siege. They had a thigh wound, a chest wound, spitting blood no less, a knee wound, an arm wound, and like the guy who got a graze wound. But he's like, I need to be here too. John Hunter, he's standing around the naval ward. He's looking at the piles of septic, dying English soldiers. And he thinks, these French guys were shot days ago and they're doing better. And in all fact, they all ended up surviving really well. Even the guy shot in the chest, coughing out blood. Whereas surgeons at the time saw infection as not only an inevitable outcome, but pus was a sign of healing to them. It was a good thing. You have a pus wound. Now, you died a few days later, if not hours, but we did. We tried. Sorry to interrupt the flow of this episode real quick, but unfortunately Dr. Mike had a scheduling conflict that resulted in him having to step away from this part of the episode. Don't worry, it's not the last time you'll hear from him, because I mentioned before that there is a little something extra at the end here, so listen through the outro and you'll hear him come back, and he'll be part of that for a bit. But I feel like we should explain why Dr. Mike just wasn't participating after this part of the episode. Although I was tempted to leave it as is and just see if anybody noticed. But he'll talk to you at the end. Basically, John Hunter's standing around the naval ward looking at all these people, and he's going like, much like an infomercial person, it's like, there's got to be a better way. What are we doing here? And so he wasn't alive to read the book, but there's a famous line from this book called The House of God, which, Alba, you should definitely read. Everybody out there should read this book. It's about practicing medicine in like the 70s and residency, and you don't have to be a doctor to appreciate it. Or maybe you shouldn't read it, actually. It did scare my wife when I went into residency. So I take that all back.
I think if you read The House of God and watch Scrubs, you kind of get a sense of why we're so messed up. So that's what you want to find out. There you go.
All right, I'm in.
John wasn't around for the book, but there's a line in there that said, quote, "The art of medicine is doing as much nothing as possible." And that book was satire. But as John observed, in this case, doing no surgery, no fishing of bullets out of wounds led to better outcomes of the 5 guys who were standing alive in front of him. And he thought there's probably something to that. And one of his core philosophies in surgery would become doing surgery only as a last resort, and if you really knew why you were doing it.
Oh, this is what I think, Aaron, you talked about in a prior episode about doing more damage. You know, like we always think you have to get the bullet out, but you could do more damage trying to get the projectile out than it did on the way in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cases in history of this. So that's crazy. He knew it this early, and we still. Yeah. Oh,
well, and like he said, like you're saying, he knew that not every bullet needed surgery, especially sketchy 18th century pick up the knife and off the ground and wipe it off on your pus-soaked smock and then do surgery with it kind of surgery.
They didn't believe in germs back then?
They did not have that.
They hadn't caught wind of them yet?
Okay. They had to go about another 100 years at this point.
Okay.
And so John published his findings along the way, and it included specific indications for bullet wound surgery. And that was to expose and tie off a bleeding artery or other big vessel, or to remove bone fragments. Those are really the only 2 reasons he said you should probably take out bullets. And honestly, given the limitations of surgery at the time, he was right. And he was rewriting the textbook based on new, observable, testable information, not what somebody had taught him or said. In 1763, Everyone involved gets bored with the war, and then it ends. There's probably more to it, but again, boring. John Hunter returns to London even more surgeon-y than before because his skills have improved, but he's dead broke, which was not awesome. So he does what any of us would do, and he does what he has to do. No matter how degrading or maligned the job, he has to make ends meet. So he kind of goes into dentistry for a little bit.
Oh my
I
gosh.
know. It's not a well thought of position.
I mean, the teeth were probably easy to pull.
But there's no anesthesia then, right?
No.
So
This is fairly anesthesia
everybody's
now.
just screaming.
Well, I mentioned he
Yeah.
goes into kind of dentistry, like 18th century dentistry. What that really means is he hangs out with a preeminent dentist in London whose name I forgot to write down, but it doesn't really matter because people then didn't really look at dentists favorably. People hated the dentist even more then than they do now, and it was considered brutish work and not well looked upon. But John Hunter could earn a living doing this, and he could still kind of do some experiments on people. So he did some dentistry, and apparently some do credit him as actually being the scientific father of dentistry as well.
What?
He
That too?
I did it all. He did it all. So he named the molars and incisors bicuspids and cuspids, or canines, in those terms that we still use today. So put that in his belt.
What'd they call it before? A front one,
teeth.
sharp one, the one behind the sharp one,
The back one, the back flat one.
back flat one,
The rotten
and
one.
Mikey. Then there's always Mikey in the bottom left. Like, what did they call
which
it
tooth
before?
is Mikey? Is he in the back or the front? He's in the back. It's got to be the
You
back.
know,
It's definitely
Max,
in the back.
I'm not a big reader, but you're convincing me to read this book, Knife.
The Knife Man. Yeah, it's
Oh,
excellent.
The
It's a
Knife
great
Man.
book.
Okay, thanks.
He also experimented with tooth transplantation, one of the earliest attempts at transplant medicine. Nice nod to our episode with the author Paul Craddock. Spare Parts was his book, and talked a lot about this sort of thing. Also, I'm going to say there's a nod here to our episode on Dr. John Brinkley. Not really a doctor, but we call him Dr. Goat Balls because that's part of what he did. There's another episode definitely worth
that's a
visiting if you're new
classic.
to the show. So John Hunter experimented with removing teeth and implanting them first in a rooster's comb because
Sure.
What?
it seemed
Sure.
like a good idea at the time.
Stick
Is
teeth
a
in the-
rooster's comb? Is that the
Yes.
thing on top?
Yes.
What?
I think it was because it has a big blood supply, and his thought was if I could put it in there, the tooth would
Oh,
survive
okay.
and stay healthy.
Okay.
Then he kind of moved on to transplantation. He's basically doing the people-to-people tooth transplantation, which unfortunately at the time involved paying poor boys and girls to have one of their teeth pulled and then put into a rich person's mouth because they had money.
It's a little on the nose for Victorian England.
Yeah, it was kind of gross in every way you can imagine,
your
and
teeth.
it was eventually stopped because it was just bad to do to human beings. And the thing is, the teeth would not really last longer than 3 to 6 years because they really wouldn't form a blood supply. But I'm just saying, not all of his ideas were winners, but it is cool that he named some teeth. John Hunter is doing what he can in the 1760s to make ends meet with this pseudo-dentistry thing. He's making a little money, but his brother William is far exceeding his exploits at this point. But a fortunate parasitic infection was about to introduce our hero surgeon to the love of his life. John Hunter is called to pay a visit to a 22-year-old daughter of one of his war buddies.
Wait,
Her
how
name
old
is-
is he right now? Old enough that it's.
Late 30s.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Okay,
she's
it's not-
22.
That's not.
I've heard worse.
Yeah.
For the time, yeah. We're gonna take this.
22. That's fine.
So, John Hunter is a gruff Scottish profanity-slinging surgeon who dissects people and animals for funsies, and she's a high society intellectual chick passing large roundworm infection. We've all seen this Hallmark movie. It's cliche recipe for love. He gives her some deworming medication, other purgatives, and she's probably got like low blood pressure and electrolyte issues, but the sparks fly, and they eventually do get married.
Nice.
Fun other aside here is that while Hunter is not one for the fancy books and literature, that's Anne's thing, his wife's thing. And she's a published poet, she's a socialite, and by all accounts, he was actually really, really supportive of her, and he actually respected her more for her work. And For that time, that's really, really progressive. The other thing that's kind of fun, I forgot to mention it later in the story, and I can't not say it. John Hunter would eventually dissect her father. Yeah, that's kind of awkward, but it happened.
That's his
later.
buddy, right?
The
His
What's that?
war buddy.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, but that was awkward. I don't think
Yeah,
he found
that's
it
his
awkward though. He was a little bit
father-in-law
different that way.
and his war buddy. Okay, yeah.
So his.
Oh, I guess I'm asking for your hand in marriage now, mate. Oh, sorry.
He definitely made that joke. So, John Hunter's marriage is not the only bright spot ahead for him. His career starts to take off. Thanks to his obsessive studies in animal dissections, he becomes a renowned animal anatomist as well. And all these newly discovered species from overseas voyages are brought to him to study and for his opinion on like what you think they're all about. This included something called a siren, which is like a salamander of some sort. I don't know, but it was all the rage at the time, and people are doing these worldwide voyages on boats, and they're like, "Hey, look at this cool animal! Let's bring it to John Hunter and see what he thinks of it." And he writes up all his discoveries on it. He's like, "Oh, this is like a reptile thing or whatever." I mean, he uses fancier language. He would dissect it and describe the anatomy and have an artist that would draw all this stuff. But this was pretty cool for the time, and it actually catches the attention of the Royal Society in London, which is one of the world's oldest scientific fellowships. And they're like, "Dude, you should totally join us." So he does in 1767. And it begins his career now as also a preeminent scientist in all kinds of things. And more experiments will follow, and one of them is probably going to result in his death.
Oh, that's a bad foreshadowing. So was he the father of veterinary medicine as well? Or?
As well, yeah.
I don't think I remember that in the book, but I would say that there's probably a lot of understanding of comparative animal anatomy that is because of him.
I mean, I'm starting to understand the title now. Is a man, the knife man, because he just cuts everything up. He does. He's like, you want to find out how it works? Just slice it open.
Well, the nice thing too, though, he didn't limit himself to like knives. He's also okay with stabby implements, which is a nice foreshadowing bit here.
Oh boy! And
there's absolutely no way we can end this podcast without revisiting the great imitator, friend of the podcast, topically speaking, syphilis.
Yes.
John Hunter, like many surgeons and physicians of the time, was obsessed with venereal disease, probably because there was so much of it in the mid to late 18th century London. Sex was everywhere and anywhere, as was sex work. There was even something called the Harris List of Covent Garden Ladies, or Man of Pleasure's Calendar, which was published annually starting in 1771. And it had like a convenient listing of all known prostitutes, brothels, with reviews and notes, mind you. Absolutely.
It's like the Yelp of this.
It is absolutely what it sounds to be. And everybody, absolutely everyone, seems to have had syphilis back then. And it surprised me to realize that while gonorrhea was described in ancient texts, syphilis descriptions didn't really start appearing until the 1490s, making it like, I don't know, the kind of in vogue thing maybe at the time. And like many medical experts at the time, John Hunter wanted to know more about sexually transmitted disease. And they knew that these were transmitted diseases, but they didn't know that they were two different diseases. And he becomes convinced that the signs and symptoms of gonorrhea, being a pleasant discharge, some pain with peeing, and swollen lymph nodes, among a bunch of other ones we're not going to get into, and the signs of syphilis, which might be more painless ulcers on the genitals, rashes, later some heart disease, and neurologic problems when it gets really advanced, well, he thinks they're all the same disease. But he's a man of science, and he wants to test his hypothesis. Now, John Hunter could have gone to the streets. He could have found some poor dude to be his lab rat. I mean, he did that for a lot of other things, so to be fair. But this experiment was way too important, so he chose his subject much more carefully. Himself.
Oh, no.
He treats a lot of patients with genital lesions, and he takes a little bit of the pus, the purulence, if you will.
No,
one of those lesions.
No, where did he put it? Oh, God, no.
His penis.
Why?
He's put it in your penis.
He took a lancet with the goo on it, and he stabbed it in multiple places, his own genitalia.
Why would you do this?
I think he wanted to give himself a sexually transmitted infection in like the absolute worst way you could think of.
Yeah,
You could just go have a bunch of sex, man.
Yes,
It was
exactly.
everywhere. Just go
He
somebody.
This is the biggest missed opportunity in the history of medicine right here. This is
He was married. You guys want him to cheat on his wife?
Oh,
This is
okay. I
much
guess I
more
didn't
noble.
stabbing
realize that
himself in the
part. But I
penis.
mean, yeah,
I don't know.
multiple times. I mean, get a swab and put it in the pee-pee hole.
Nope, he's not going to do that. They don't have swabs back then. Come on, Alba.
Urethra. That's the word.
Yeah, it is the word. So he gives himself a disease, and he documents his symptoms like for years after this. He documents his first fevers, his discharge, his lesions, his asymptomatic periods.
Did
where
he give it
wasn't
to his
having
wife too?
symptoms.
He probably did, didn't he?
I don't remember that they mentioned that. Good call.
She's like,
Okay, maybe it's.
what did you
probably like,
do?
"You
That's very
crazy-"
unfortunate.
I think that's the only place people in this time actually did not have sexual intercourse with their married people. I think it was just with everybody else. So he documents all of this, like later having rashes, all the symptoms that you would expect to have from this stupid experiment. And he comes to the conclusion that the gonorrhea symptoms that you see are the beginning, and that the syphilis symptoms later are just the later parts of gonorrhea as it spreads around the body. In other words, he thinks the syphilis symptoms are gonorrhea gone wild. Now, about that part, he was also
wild.
Yeah, and about that part, he was also wrong. He didn't bat 1,000% on everything, and but he did swing at every pitch. I'm just saying. We'll put a pin in this story at the end, but the thing is that a lot of sexually transmitted infections are transmitted together today, very much as they were back then. But hey, he was trying. And at the same time that he's putting a pin in himself in 1768, John sits for the oral exam at Surgeons Hall, 15 years since he started his path into surgery, which is way late by this time, and he receives his official accreditation as a gentleman surgeon. He takes a staff surgeon job at St. George's Hospital, where he was an apprentice long before, and he continues to improve his station in life, establishing his private patient practice, taking on surgical students of his own, to whom he could pass his ideas and views on medicine. One of these students was one Edward Jenner, who apparently credited his time with John Hunter as being a major influence on his process of observation and experimentation as he undertook when developing the first ever vaccine for smallpox. And I would obviously refer our listeners to a two-part episode we did on that story, but Edward Jenner, big John Hunter fan and trained directly under him. As John Hunter's fortunes improve, he eventually buys this sizable house in London, and he slowly converts it into a house, like plus a carriage house with like this large space in between in the yard, which he builds a structure on that would serve as a museum hall later. It sounds crazy, and actually, apparently, his house was the inspiration for Jekyll and Hyde, like the laboratory and house. That's one of a literary reference, one of a few that he's actually credited with. So his house becomes a nice house, plus an anatomy school of his own, plus a dissection hall, plus a lecture hall, and this huge display thing in the middle. It does evolve over years, but this is where it eventually goes. And he needs all this space because, in light of all his fascination with nature and creatures, John Hunter has amassed a sizable collection of exotic animals living in taxidermied. He has leopards and wolves like roaming around his estate, and he's even used zebus to drive his carriage because he was eccentric AF, and I love him for that. He would go around to animal menageries or zoos and be like, "Hey, when your tiger or elephant or rhino dies, I want it," and he would pay for it. And he wanted to dissect it and then make a preparation out of it, and yeah. This is the type of person he was.
I wonder how much how many people I wonder how much he cut up in his life. It's gotta be thousands and thousands.
Well, at least 2,000 people. Actually, I will give you an overall view of his collection by the end.
Wow, collection. Wow. Okay.
So he's running his own anatomy school as well out of his house, and I need you to imagine these house parties. His socialite wife is hosting London's premier artists, authors in the drawing room where guests could stumble down the hall as they did and open a door and then find students dissecting a corpse. Like, oops, wrong hallway. Or worse yet, it could happen by the back door of the carriage house where Hunter literally had a corpse delivery bay built into the carriage house so people could do some deliveries late at night. And just madness. It's just madness, and definitely way more interesting than any party I've ever been invited to.
Mm-hmm.
Alba's not excited about going to that party.
I would go to that party.
I have a mix. Yeah, I don't know.
One of my favorite bits, I think I talk about it later, I'm just going to bring it in now, is that he had obtained a giraffe that had died, and he
Mhm.
dissected it and made a preparation out of it, but it was too tall. So he just cut off its legs and put it in his foyer. So it's like one of the first things you saw, like
My God.
a de-legged giraffe. And then later he built the structure so he could kind of like put it back together and stand it up. So there's that. I would hang out with this dude.
absinthe. I would go to that party, but
Yeah, I think that's how you have to.
It's the death of it all, I think, that makes me squeamish. Because, like, I used to watch Investigation Discovery, like, surgeries while I was eating dinner. Like, that doesn't bother me at
Sure.
all. I think it's the like, deceased part of it all that makes me like,
it was different
Yeah.
times. I mean, this,
I will choose to focus on all of the already deceased animal dissections here and not mention a lot of his other experiments because they don't make me feel great either. We'll push past them.
Thanks.
At St. George's Hospital, John is the most popular surgeon lecturer at this point. He has students like Edward Jenner who idolize him and his way of thinking, and by 1772, John is approaching the governors of the hospital to try and make it the first combined medical school and teaching hospital, which is kind of not a normal thing at the time. Those governors and Hunter's colleagues, who were less than fond of his teaching, said, no, we don't want to do that. And so, regardless of that lack of support, John presses on. He takes the approach of starting with the basics of normal physiology, as it was best known at the time, as the first step in teaching his students, and he then focused on teaching them the normal anatomy of the body. Then he'd move on to the pathology and how disease seems to change that normal anatomy and seems to work. And this is the very same way we learn medicine to this day.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Correct.
Same order, yeah.
Here again, John Hunter is way ahead of his time, and he told his students to disregard all those famous Greeks. Don't bother taking notes in my class, and always to ask why things in the human body work the way they do, or why you're doing procedures. Other surgeons of the time, when they lectured, just showed you how to do procedures. They didn't really teach you why or when. I mean, you'd figure it out from the context, but John Hunter wanted his students to say, why are we doing this at every single time? And I love this quote from him, which is, quote, never ask me what I've said or written, but if you ask me what my present opinions are, I'll tell you. And that was his approach to his students. You don't have to write down what I said. I'm not going to become one of the Greeks in the future. Just let's have a debate and discussion based on what we know. Now, his lectures also kind of sound fun because apparently he wasn't like a great speaker, and he would fill himself with alcohol and laudanum, an opiate, to get through those lectures, which I'm sure would be interesting.
Syphilis-ridden drunk guy talking about whatever he had cut apart most recently.
He's not wrong. But one time, so he had bits, he had jokes. So one time, a lecture was apparently not well attended to like kind of go up and down in terms of popularity. So John Hunter brought in a skeleton so he could begin with his customary gentleman. There's one student and the skeleton makes two, so it's gentleman.
Oh, got it.
I thought it was a decent bit. It's not a bit I could pull off because I'm just, but.
Well, it's visual.
Maybe you should read the book. It's better in the book.
It's okay. Not every joke lands.
No, it was good. It was good.
It's not my joke. It's John's joke.
Exactly.
So John accrues more and more wealth, and he gets a bunch of powerful patients, and eventually he is named Surgeon Extraordinary to King George III, which is really just kind of a symbolic recognition. He's not really truly doing the clinical title, but it is impressive nonetheless that he has actually raised his career to that time. And I've left out tons of stuff because I can't cover the entire book in this show, but there's a lot of cool steps in between then. But in 1777, John Hunter starts to experience some symptoms himself. And those are chest discomfort, dizziness, and shortness of breath. They come and go. They've been steadily worsening. And he starts to plan for his future, well, for his family. Because along all this time, I've mentioned all these animals, living, otherwise, these specimens, all these collections. As he does a dissection, he makes a new preparation. And mostly this has drained him of money. He is constantly trying to work to spend for all of this, and he realizes, I have to do something to take care of my family. And so he starts to put together his collection as a true museum that hopefully will make money. So I mentioned over 2,000 dissections of just humans. There were innumerably more animals, and this includes crazy stuff like whales, giraffes, elephants, the whole thing. In fact, it's said that his preparation of the whale's aorta was the inspiration for many of the descriptions in Moby Dick.
Wow.
It was pretty cool. So,
Hit a whale aorta? You could probably fit a
Yeah, holy
like
crap.
you could probably stand in it.
you probably could, but yeah, I'm sure.
Where do you keep a whale aorta?
Behind the dehoofed giraffe, I think. Actually, he did have it
Yeah.
out. I believe he had it.
Oh my word.
Yeah, it's
That's
big.
big.
If he dissected it, he would endeavor to make a preserved specimen out of it and put it on display. And with his chest symptoms, he was becoming aware of his mortality, and he was trying to put up this legacy for his family. And he collected everything and anything having to do with the natural world, having to do with medical specimens. And one of the things he really liked was medical oddities. One of the centerpieces of his eventual museum was the articulated and preserved 7'7" skeleton of Charles Byrne, known as the Irish Giant. He was a sideshow performer born with gigantism. We did mention him in the Andre the Giant episode as well. Hunter approached him at one point while he was alive, and I guess kind of casually worked into conversation. Hey man, can I have your bones when you die? It's kind of my thing. And Charles said no, probably that the conversation was making him uncomfortable, and he spent the rest of his life afraid that John Hunter was going to get his skeleton.
I mean, that's fair.
Standing
Somebody
at a
asked for
party,
my bones,
standing at a
they'd be
party,
like-
and Hunter's just like staring at him from across the room.
I like to imagine that's how this all started.
Yes.
But yes, Alba, that is a fair fear, because as it turns out, John Hunter was planning to get his skeleton. So Hunter had an assistant of his follow Byrne once he heard of the giant starting to develop some health problems, which people with untreated gigantism, especially at that time, would have at a younger age. And so then when the Irish Giant did die of natural causes, Hunter's assistant was there and pulled off a Hunterian classic.
The old put the rocks in the coffin bit, eh?
Well, Charles Byrne asked 4 of his friends to stand vigil on his coffin to make sure that nobody could take his body, and then he wanted to be thrown into the sea so that, again, nobody could take his body for a museum piece per se. Little did they know that when they did huck his coffin into the water, they did throw a bunch of stones into the bottom, because Hunter's assistant had already bribed the Undertaker, who, I don't know how, but basically swapped the body for the rocks, and then it ended up at John Hunter's back door. He waited 5 years to put it on display because it was kind of an open secret. They're like, he probably totally got that body, and he did. So, yeah, they wouldn't, I think we've said this before, but they wouldn't develop informed consent till much later.
I hope they eventually. I hope that man's body did end up getting buried at some point. No, is it still on display somewhere? That's messed up. Even now, knowing that he didn't want his body on display.
Well, speaking of the collection, the museum eventually does open up, and it's a rousing success. It would go on to have 14,000 individual items. So 1,400 human animal parts and spirits.
14,000?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the breakdown. So 1,400 of those were human animal parts and spirits. There's about 1,200 dried bones, skulls, skeletons, blah, blah, blah. 6,000 pathological specimens, so like organs that are diseased, etc., and then put into jars or whatever. There's like 800 dried plants and invertebrates. There was 3,000 plus fossils, because he later got into fossils and geology like you do. And there was many, whatever remainder number of those were taxidermy specimens, including that giraffe I had mentioned. So an enormous collection. And the other interesting side part of this is some of the things that John Hunter noted because of his collection. So he was well ahead of his time in another way. one of my favorites was a display that he made for this collection when he made the museum that basically put a chimpanzee skull on one side, put an African skull in the middle, and then put a European skull on the far right. Now, the problematic part here is fairly obvious, but Hunter was saying that these three things are related. The problematic part was that he was saying that the chimpanzee was the lower life form. He did place the African skull in the middle, and then he thought the European white person skull was the most advanced form of the species, which is, yes, problematic, certainly well in keeping with the time, but
Let's hear it for 18th century racism.
yes, 18th century racism. What this display did was show John Hunter's belief that all organisms probably arose from a simpler, earlier organism. He never used the term evolution, but quite contrary to the religious and scientific sentiments of the time, this was his thought in a lot of his writings. In fact, the Royal Society suppressed his writings until I think it was 2 years after Darwin published The Origin of Species, well after John Hunter had already been dead.
And they're like, oh yeah, we knew this. We knew that. We knew that already. Yeah.
And this is also important to mention here. Fun fact, that giant collection I mentioned, which eventually I'll tell you where it ended up. Frequent visitor to that collection was Charles Darwin.
Nice.
And so the most impressive thing Darwin did besides The Origin of Species was to appear as an episode as well on this podcast.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
But all things do come to an end eventually. Even John Hunter. By 1790, he was looking well beyond his years and described as being quite limited in his mobility, like having constant chest pain, what we call anginal symptoms. And during an argument with his fellow surgeons at St. George's Hospital, John Hunter stood up, suddenly walked a few paces into another room, and died in the arms of the nearest physician.
Well, that's how you do it.
That is how you do it.
I mean, they didn't. Don't let those people operate on you. It's 17, whatever.
Dying mid-argument is kind of a way an angry Scottish surgeon of the time would want to go, I think.
Yeah.
Now, look, in what was probably a bit of an awkward next day at the anatomy school and home that he had, John Hunter's body was laid out on his dissection table, and the very same students whom he had just been teaching the day before were to carry out his wishes and dissect their teacher to learn what had happened to him when he died.
Wow.
I have to respect that.
It's pretty odd.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
yeah,
respectable.
let's give him his props for that.
Yeah. So he died of heart disease, and many accounts believe this probably was related to his syphilis eventually.
That he had for years.
Correct, because
Yeah.
syphilis can lay dormant, and then it can cause heart and neurologic problems much later in life. I don't know that we know that for sure, but it is a theory that gets mentioned quite a bit, and it is plausible. Not all of his wishes were met, though, because what John Hunter wanted was he wanted a preservation of his own heart made, because he knew it was likely going to be the cause of his death before it happened. And he also wanted his Achilles tendon preserved, which at one point had ruptured when he was younger, and he undertook a series of, basically, he made up physical therapy to try and heal it, and he did heal it. So he wanted it displayed to show that it did heal. So it's actually kind of a side thing. He was a forerunner in physical therapy too. He actually had prescribed it for different things.
Nice.
And yeah, so that's another thing he did. But his brother-in-law, Everard Home, who was an assistant anatomist of his for much of the later years, he's the one who carried out the dissection, but he did not make those preservations that John Hunter wanted. Everard would go on to steal much of John's unpublished works, and he would pass them off as his own discoveries to the Royal Society.
Everard.
Yep.
Rude.
Come on,
Definitely
buddy.
rude.
Come on, buddy.
Now, part of this is like there's this whole thing where like John was like not mean to him, but definitely did not. Like John doted on Edward Jenner and the students that he really liked, and Everard was like, "Yeah, you're my brother-in-law, whatever." So I think there was some of that, but John had
He was
so many
Jelly
things.
Belly.
He was
So
Jelly
he's
Belly.
like,
There were
"Yeah, I'm
so many
stealing your
things
shit
that John Hunter
stuff."
had documented and written that were prime discoveries of the day, so they get passed off
He
as
muttered to himself the whole time. He's like, "Who's in charge now, old man? Who's your heart?"
well. While
Yeah,
he was
because
muttering, one of John Hunter's assistants came to Everard and said, "Hey, I'm pretty sure I know what you did, but I'm transcribing everything. Can you give me some of his works and some of those things? Because we're making an archive for the museum and that sort of thing." And Everard had burned most of it
No.
after he had published. So many of John
Come
Hunter's actual works
on.
were lost, and they were burned in a fire. And Everard is undoubtedly a petty asshole who went on to be
What?
known for that fact alone in the annals of history.
Wow.
And quite sad.
Oh, that's the worst.
Wow.
But it's all that being said. Ultimately, the Hunterian collection was sold to the British government and ended up with the Royal College of Surgeons. Though it was thought to be worth about £70,000 in its day, it was sold for £15,000. So not a great return on that investment. Things don't turn out super great for a lot of the other people around. I'll gloss over it here, but like his wife, and that's nobody else really goes on to benefit from his whole life's work. And so that's fairly sad, of course.
Oh,
I wanted to end with at least a rundown of some of his other accomplishments, maybe
Yeah.
cheer everybody up.
well, he's already the father of dentistry and veterinary medicine and anatomy and
Physical therapy.
Yeah, but you can always do
maybe
more.
Some in there.
I will end with this little run. So, one of the first people, John Hunter was one of the first to describe how bones remodel, grow, and repair. Did this through a series of experiments. And he said bones are kind of like they grow from the ends out, etc. They're sort of constantly remodeling. And he was absolutely right about that.
Cool.
One of the first to dissect and create preparations to explain the function of the lymphatic system. He was also one that figured out that the lymphatic system carries fats in digestive process. So that was pretty cool. He independently discovered how fetal and maternal circulation between the uterus and placenta worked. And actually the publishing and description of that work would be a big rift between him and his brother, which I haven't included because I got to leave some mystery for the book. But they never reconciled over it because William stole all of that work from him and tried to pass it off as his own without giving due credit. And they got into a big messy fight about it. And it was pretty interesting. But that concept that how the maternal and fetal circulation in the placenta and uterus worked, that was independently discovered by someone else who published a little bit before them, but we don't have any evidence to say that they knew about it. And John's work on it was so ground up with illustrations and all that sort of thing that it's probably reasonable that he did truly independently figure this out. He also came up with a unique operation for leg aneurysms that saved many lives. And this sort of formed the understanding that there is something called collateral circulation. If you close off a big blood vessel, little blood vessels in the area can sometimes take over the work of putting blood flow around it. And so he did that. And finally, like I said, he dissected his father-in-law because I have to mention that. It's just insane. Nobody was off limits.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, the fact that he gave himself up, that's pretty
It's
cool.
a cool end to that movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
So
Good final cutscene. Haha. Cutscene.
Oh, excellent. Though he was not well thought of by his colleagues at the time, and I haven't even included half the stuff that went down between all of them, I just imagine this was jealousy. Because John Hunter was looking far past his time, and he may be one of the most notable unsung heroes in medical history. His body was eventually buried at Westminster Abbey, with the Royal College of Surgeons eventually acknowledging much of his accomplishments, at least with a plaque naming John Hunter the, quote, father of scientific surgery. There is an overview of the Knife Man. I really encourage everyone to check out that book. And by Wendy Moore, I've left so much out. There's so much I could not fit into this episode, and it's really well written. And I was going to say, I don't know that you listen to the show, Wendy, but I really appreciate that book. I think the show is here because of it. I think that about does it. So,
Yeah,
Alba,
wow.
I think we do have to pick and procure one more artifact for the PH Pod Annals of Medical History. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I'm sorry Mike is not here to hear what my pick is. I choose a lancet with gonorrhea on it.
It's fitting. It's fitting. I think I'm just going to use gloves when we handle it, but we will have to put that in the archives of the Poor Historians podcast. Well, we appreciate everyone listening, and we'd love to hear from all of you out there. If you still want to send us messages, we will be monitoring our social media and email, so feel free to do so. I will still work to respond to all those messages, and I thank you for all the very nice ones we've received in the past weeks especially. We'll also leave our merch store live live for a little while more in case you want a keepsake or those sort of things. The link will be in our show notes. I'm going to maintain my personal activity on Threads, so if you want to keep tabs on me, I'm on there as Dr. Max. That's spelled Dr_MQX. So there you can get to my page through our social media links as well. We want to thank our PHPod patrons for helping make the show possible and for their support all this time. We'll keep our episodes archived and live on the podcast servers for the foreseeable future, so you can if you want to. So go and tell a friend about us. Go take a listen. We'll still be up there. And for one last time, Forest Winds are signing out. Hail Mary.
Yeah, I know you guys are going to chat later, but I double booked. I'm really bad at scheduling, but I really am going to miss this. I was really kind of bummed when we said we were going to part ways. I do hope to keep in touch with you guys, and I will never, ever, ever look at another medical history thing again, ever. No, it's going to be hard to not like look up these topics, and I'm still really inquisitive, and I'll probably read some books. That's not going to happen. But yeah, it was just really nice to. These sessions were just fun.
Yeah, they're
Just
awesome.
getting to know you, Alba.
Yeah.
Yeah, back at you.
Yeah.
No, like the social
learned a
club of
lot.
this needs to live on. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, because we just
Yeah, please.
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's
And then we
pretty
could
easy to
post it
maintain.
on whatever Stitcher.
Yeah, we just
Fiverr.
have reunions. We can just have reunion posts and we'll.
Why not?
Well,
Yeah,
on the
once a
topic,
year.
Mike, actually, real quick, what's the big takeaway from the show?
Big takeaway is
The
just
thing that was
like,
surprising to you.
I just think how interested I was in medical history. I kind of like backed into the podcast. You know, I thought, oh, this is a really fun idea. And I was at a time in my life where I wasn't going to say no to anything, almost anything. So I was like, let's do this. But just how interested I was and just how much I've learned over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. And then that you guys are fun and Alba's nice and funny. And it's just nice to hang around with like-minded people that it's just fun.
Yeah.
We've
And
had
I
fun.
get to say
We've had
piss
fun.
and
Man.
dick
People have
and
had
poop
fun
and-
because of us. That's fun. That's good stuff. What's one thing you want? You hope one of our fans or that our fans take away from the experience on the topic of medical history or medicine in general?
I think that like there's a lighter side to medicine, and you know a lot of the things you go to, it's like talking about medicine as it is, just the objective stuff about it. But there's like the subjective human story side that's usually way more interesting, and it was way messed up way back in the day, and it's still messed up today. But I think just kind of taking away that humor piece and seeing that, you know, probably realizing a lot of us in medicine are broken and there's we will not
in our own ways, certainly.
Yeah. Mm.
I think that's fair. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
If you gotta kick out, I will.
Okay.
I'll do some sort of explainer in the middle,
Okay.
and just be like, yeah, well, but we'll put you in at the end. All
Okay.
that will go.
That sounds good. Oh, and then if you need filler, that's what she said. That looks like a penis, only smaller. Yeah, if you need to fill me in.
I will do.
Okay.
Just put
Thanks,
those-
guys.
All right, man.
See ya.
Have fun.
Bye,
Take
Mark.
Well, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do something special after the outro and the music. So I think we're obligated, aren't we? No pressure though.
Mhm.
More or less.
No, I thought it'd be nice to do a little recap as we had from Mike before. I don't know, a little bit of fun reminiscence and, you know, kind of things. And so I was going to ask you guys a few things and share my thoughts too. But I'm curious. I'll go. What's your favorite episode to be a part of?
I mean, the Viagra episodes gotta go down as one of the funniest.
You know, I was going to say the Viagra episode, but I wasn't on that one. I just listened to it later. That was a good one.
That was a good one. That was definitely a good one. I think that was, yeah. The funniest part being too that was like one of Mike's most researched episodes, because I think the listener may have an idea, because I think he said it multiple times that Mike's kind of a shoot from the hip. I'm a,
Yeah,
I write for you. Ooh, I didn't mean that. I like to do a lot of research and writing and that sort of thing. I think that's like my style. Aaron is, I'm going to say you're closer to me, and then Mike is roll out of bed and here's his episode. But that one he put so much passion into and like so many sources. I had to appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I think I
good.
think it's a fair one. Well, how about one you were in, Alba?
I was gonna say the chimney sweeps episode. I really liked that episode.
Interesting. That's
I
like
think-
one that is not super popular with people because of the subject matter.
I mean it's awful. It's awful
It is.
what happened. It's just I think it's my favorite because probably my biggest thing that I've gotten from this show is just how much I've learned.
Mm.
I've learned like not just like little facts like you said. It's not like just this is how you do this or like this information in a vacuum. I feel like I've gotten kind of more of a breadth of possibilities, in my thinking where I feel like my thinking is less boxed in and I know more of what I don't know, which is nothing. I feel like I know nothing.
You know more now, though. That's
I know
one of the fun
more.
parts of medicine.
Yeah, I know more about not knowing, which is cool.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I was trying to think. I have not pre-thought answers for this. I think I really had fun researching the Fuzzy Green Tongue episode. I just had a lot of fun with that research. I remember I was pretty excited about that one. And I have to say, too, one of the things that I will often laugh out loud when I'm cutting the episodes together. And the skit that we actually did on the last one, the Tylenol skit, that made me laugh out loud when I just heard it again. I just I don't know why, that one got me pretty good. So I've enjoyed those quite a bit. And I think that the cool thing is that we've never had a long, like, we're going to get to these sort of episodes. We sort of let them come and go as like the interests were there. And so you get stuff like Mike's Viagra episode where he was just really interested in the topic and it kind of showed. So I think the Fuzzy Green Tongue is maybe my personal favorite, but they're all pretty close.
My favorite skit was like, so we had the metal guy going into the apothecary shop. Like that was a recurrent bit. Like I think that was one of the best bits. Like this, because
Metal Guy will live on forever. I don't know if Alba was here for Metal Guy. Were you ever here?
No.
For Metal Guy? We had this thing where anytime we did a skit and it somehow involved like a German doctor, like from way back in the day, because it started out, I think, on I want to say the Eating Corpses episode. Corpse medicine episode. That's before Alba's time on the show. It started out then, and it was like I just made up this like metalhead guy who was like super weird and hung out with the buying your corpse made medicines. It made sense, but then I kind of had him as a little bit of a recurring character.
Yeah,
and it was absolutely one of my favorite.
He was my
kind
favorite
of bits to write.
Yeah, I agree with Mike though. Like just the social aspect, I didn't realize that would be such a nice part of it.
Yeah,
I think I know, Max. You said like you wanted people to sort of know a little bit about where we're coming from, and that's I think the thing. Like looking into our weird world from the outside, we're just people like everyone else, and like we just have a weird world that we live in, and we adjust the way you would sort of expect people to adjust. But then also like just hanging out together and talking about all these things and knowing where we came from and why some of the things we do it the way we do it it's been a good journey.
Yeah, and I think I was going to say too, like kind of some of the things that I will credit the show with is I really learned to enjoy writing again, because it had been since college since I really did writing. And so for this, I put together like this episode, etc., and I had a good time writing. And I think it made me a better writer by, we did this for 3+ years. I definitely will in the future have more something to do with writing because of this show. Because before it, I did not write. I hadn't written since college. Wow. So I think that was a big
I really
benefit.
want to thank you, Alba, too, because you came in. I think you gave this show at least an extra year. I mean, it just...
Yeah, we passed my 1-year mark sometime in August, I think.
Yeah.
So I feel bad that we're ending it in that way, but I think we would not have lasted anywhere near what we did. You just like freshen up the whole thing, and it's been really cool.
Yeah,
you're also you get the most positive messages about you. We don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear who the star of the podcast is.
Yep.
So.
I mean, this gave me a lot of confidence going into my internship because, and I think part of the reason I liked the chimney sweep episode was because I was able to follow along. Like there was a lot of, you know, um, we were still doing the figuring then of like, well, what do you think this could be? This is what the patient has. And the fact that I was able to, like Max, you said, Alba, you asked some good questions. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not an imposter, maybe? I don't know. And I
Yeah.
still, you know, sometimes being in a medical setting or in a hospital clinical kind of setting, feel a little bit of that imposter syndrome. But this podcast gave me that one, the continuing to refine like my clinical thinking style. Like, am I keeping my thoughts broad enough? Am I avoiding my premature closure bias? Two, the confidence, the fact that like even though, you know, I'm not going into medicine, the fact that I can keep up with y'all's conversation is like, okay, I probably can keep up with some of these complex topics. And then three, the friendships, as cheesy as it is, but like the fact that I can text y'all during the day and be like, you know, I did this, and you know that there's somebody, that there are three people that I consider my friends that also have an understanding of what I'm going through.
Oh, heck yeah.
Because
that's cool.
There's like that Venn diagram is the three of you are in the middle, and that's you know, that's kind of.
Yeah, and I can tell, and I've said it before on the show, that you're the way that you formulate your questions and you would ask them. So, listener, Alba does not know what really the episode's going to be about. There's not like she gets to read the document and like come up with these questions. She's just doing it on the fly, and that speaks to your just, I think, natural clinical ability to connect those dots. And so I think that's a talent that I don't know if it's teachable. I think you have to have a bit of it, and then just now we cultivate it.
Thanks.
So
thanks, guys. I really it's really meant a lot to me to do this, and you're gonna still hear from me.
That's fine.
Yeah, please. I mean, I think, and when you're up in town, we should hang out. I mean, and we should, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what this is all
graduate
about.
at some point,
these relationships
right?
are.
Yeah, I graduate in May.
Yeah,
I'll be a social worker.
Let's do a party.
Let's just go back to one thing and say you are going into medicine, right? I mean, this is a team sport. Like it takes all of us to take care of these people, and I would say a significant proportion of the time they don't need me; they need you, and that's for sure the truth. So
we tend to make things worse.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is yeah, this is a house for all of us, right? The house of medicine has to expand from what it was way back in the day.
It is. Well, is there, I don't know, anything you carry forward from this whole thing?
Just a huge thank you to all the listeners. I mean, it's sometimes very scary to put a creative product out into the world, and it's really been really wonderful that people gave us all the feedback they did and gave us their time and shared. Hopefully they're doing something with their time while they're listening to us, like, I don't know, doing a nice walk or something. Who knows?
Driving.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But yeah, it's been really wonderful. The, you know, kind of the number of people who have sort of reached out or given us positive feedback. That's really, really wonderful. And I'm glad that they shared their time with us. And I felt very touched and happy that we were able to have all this work. So
I think so.
Yeah, I second that. It's a great platform. Great that people want to send us messages, and the positivity that we've received is really, really meant a lot. And yeah, knowing that like that it's reaching beyond the US, that there are listeners outside of the US,
I
even
know.
is like, holy crap. That's yeah, it's pretty incredible.
I think so. But I think we can be proud of it.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Let's leave it there.
Thanks for putting this together, Max. Thanks for inviting us to do this fun adventure.
For sure.
Adventure.
That's all right. That just means we go on to the next one.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. Let me oh shit, did I hit record? I'm just kidding.